Hi, everybody. Happy Tuesday. I have a new Patreon jingle, Christmas jingle, inspired by going to see my friend's kids' holiday pageant. The son was the one in the pageant. The daughter was working the AV booth, and I was like, yeah! I was really excited about that. Because every other year she's been put in the pageant under protest. Because her mom is the director, but this year she wanted to work AV, and I'm like, yeah, go kid. Exciting. But one of the songs we sang, because it was in church, even though it wasn't on a Sunday, was Angels We Have Heard on High. And I'm like, hey, this would make a good Patreon jingle, because it's one of those deceptively hard songs they let kids cheat at in choir, but I'm the only one singing now, so I can't cheat. So here we go. Hey, 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 Patreon, become a supporter. Hey, Patreon, start supporting today. And of course, when you're a kid and you sing that in choir, it's glory. You cheat. But that's not, it's supposed to be like flowy, 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 flowy. At least I think so. I think it sounds more singing to God that way. But I digress. We're talking about critical thinking, not negative thinking. Proper, rational, logical thought. And this is, I'm actually, planning on starting a podcast up about this soon on the FU network, where I also do Hey Ladies. But my co-host got sick, very sick this week, so we're gonna have to hold off on that. It wasn't gonna launch into the new year anyway. We just want to put some in the can. But this is an interest of mine, and it always has been, for various reasons. But when the culture war in video games got really, really heated, it became more important to me, because certain catchphrases started getting thrown around. You know, problematic and pernicious were some of those. And for those of you who are fairly new to the channel, and there's quite a few of you, welcome. There's been sort of a turnover of late, because YouTube purged about 200 hate watchers. But there are now new people who may not necessarily know certain things about this channel. I realized it's been a while since I've done something like this, and so that's why I'm doing it now. And this is, of course, in response to some of the rather passionate criticism I have gotten over the video I did last week on the Witcher trailers for the Netflix series. And my not being persuaded by the criticism led people to accuse me of not listening to valid criticism. And my mic popped there. Apologies. But see, if someone were to criticize me on my mic popping and not realizing it, that would be valid criticism. But the criticism I have been getting regarding this video I did on the Witcher Netflix series and the games and the books is not criticism I consider to be valid. But no, to some people, that is me not listening to valid criticism. And I realize that I think valid criticism is actually something of a malapropism. People actually mean earnest criticism instead of valid criticism. And of course, I have evidence to back this up, because that'd be pretty freaking hypocritical of me if I didn't. So let's break down the term valid criticism. And ironically, you know, Google's awesome sometimes. But here we go. Ready? Valid. Of an argument or point, having a sound basis in logic or fact, reasonable or cogent. A valid criticism is the example. Criticism, the expression of disapproval of something or someone, I inverted that, based on perceived faults or mistakes. He received a lot of criticism. The valid part is what I want to draw your attention to. An argument or point having a sound basis in logic or fact, reasonable or cogent. Now, the criticisms that people claim are valid that I am ignoring are, I got to get Phil Light in there. There we go. Involve me sort of saying, no, you're just wrong, to three sort of main points of argument. That I was inaccurate in me saying they played up Yennefer's childhood. Let's face it, in the books, it's a deformity. It's not just a disability. It is a deformity. The Netflix trailer playing that up way more than it was in the books, and certainly was never dealt with in the games. That's point one. Point two was them aging up Ciri. Now, meaning they depict Ciri as far older in the Netflix series than she was in the books at the time those storylines happened. And in the games, they actually made her slightly younger, and I realized that I thought she was about 5 in those cutesy poo scenes. It's possible she was just like 9 years old, 10 years old and small. But maybe she was 10. I realized afterwards, I'm getting older. All kids seem like babies to me. But maybe she was about 10 years old in those flashback scenes in The Witcher 3. Which was the age she was at when she is first introduced in the Witcher stories. I checked these things, this and the Yennefer thing, with people who actually speak and read Polish to make sure I was sure, because people were so sure I was wrong that I went to people that it could actually confirm in the original language. And what they told me was that, yes, I remembered correctly. Yennefer's, in the book, they call her a hunchback. That's not politically correct enough for Netflix. So they say she had a twisted spine, which I personally went, I have a friend who, they've passed away now, but they had a twisted spine. They didn't look like that. A twisted spine doesn't give you this, shoulder that's way up here on the jaws like this. Like, no. There was more going on than a twisted spine. But that's one of those politically correct things that I'm like, if you're going to show the cruelty of the world, call her the pejorative. Like, call her the insult. Call her the hunchback. It's not the twisted spine guy of Notre Dame, right? Call it what people would call it. That's a major thing in The Witcher, the books, that I really think the game kind of did, but this is why I say the games are even too pretty for me, because it is a dark, nihilistic, brutal world. And I get why the games made everything look more, aesthetically pleasing, because games have to be fun. But, compared to the way things are depicted in the books, it's way shinier. So I was correct about both those things, according to people who speak and read Polish. I was sort of open to the idea that maybe the fan translations I read got it wrong, but they didn't. And the biggest one for me was somebody who quoted the quote from the book to show me how wrong I was about the color of Triss Marigold's hair. Now, if there's something I know about, it's having red hair. Now, this is Triss, for people who don't know, okay? This is Triss as she's depicted in The Witcher 3. Full disclosure, here she is in Witcher 1, Witcher 2, Witcher 3. You can see the credit from the subreddit I got this from. Note, again, the color of her hair. Now, Triss, in the books, is described as having hair the color of chestnuts. These are chestnuts, okay? One of these things is not like the others. Now, chestnut hair, as I pointed out on Twitter, looks like... Wait a second. No, wrong one. I just closed it. Shoot. Chestnut hair looks the color of chestnuts, okay? Now, the closest is probably The Witcher 2, but her hair struck me more as burgundy there. Not even in The Witcher 1 do we get close to chestnut. Let me switch back so I can get you an actual picture of chestnut hair that I accidentally closed. And this is really important because in order for criticism to be valid, it must be based on facts. We remember the definition, correct? We remember? Now, the problem is there's a bit of a weirdness that goes on Google. That if you Google chestnut, you get auburn comes up some of the time. And that's misleading. And I want to clear this up because if somebody got the idea of what chestnut hair is based on Google, Google lied. This is chestnut hair. Okay? This is not auburn hair. It's certainly not red hair. And I'll remind you, once again, Triss's hair isn't even auburn. That's red. That's freaking fire engine red. That color does not exist in nature. The closest you get to a hair color that exists in nature would be in The Witcher 1. But even that, like that's that color in low light conditions, which means it's much brassier in full sunlight. And when they do hair color ads like this, it's bright, bright, bright light. So all the highlights show up. And so yes, this looks reddish. Chestnut hair is a brown tone with reddish highlights. Basically, it is not auburn. Okay? If you go to hair color charts, okay, you'll see chestnut looks much brighter than it shows up in person. My hair color is closer to like what they would call cinnamon here. And the color charts are so far off. They use so many lighting tricks. I know because I do cosplay, that there are actually numbers assigned to hair colors. And a medium auburn, which is what I tend to go with when I'm looking for extensions that come close to my hair, is a medium auburn is like a 30, a number 30. That's the consistent thing you look for on the box or the bag when you buy a wig. That will be the correct color. And then I kind of soak it in hot water, get the over dye off, and it's close enough. Even that's too dark for my hair. And this grows out of my head naturally. Okay. This is highlight. But chestnut is much darker. Chestnut comes in, some wig companies classify chestnut as a number 6. Others call it a number 8, but it is nowhere near a medium auburn, which is what Triss Marigold's hair is in The Witcher. That's a medium to very bright auburn. This would be closer to a paprika, according to this, but not even. That's way, way brighter. Again, cinnamon. Triss's hair. Triss's hair in The Witcher 3. In no universe is that the color of chestnut. And yet, me saying this is not listening to valid criticism. Now, like I said, if someone Googled chestnut hair, they may have come across auburn, which is just Google messing up. It is not similar. But this is why I think that how a lot of people use the term valid criticism, what they're actually saying is earnest criticism. And this is extremely important because it seems like, talking to people on Twitter about this, there has been a false dichotomy that has developed, that there are only two states, valid criticism and trolling. And the truth is, and a lot of people are sensitive to this because they feel like they're dismissed as trolls when they believe their criticism is reasonable and valid. And what it really is earnest. And people shouldn't be mocked for being earnest. Like, I strongly believe that. Okay. Again, earnest is resulting from or showing sincere and intense conviction. That is much more accurate a description to the criticism that anybody dealing with video games usually gets, as opposed to an argument or point having a sound basis in logic or fact, reasonable or cogent. Why do I say that? Because someone who is the equivalent of yelling at you in text, what I call angry typing. Like when someone's going, you clearly don't know anything about The Witcher. You know nothing. And here's these reasons that I'm totally wrong about. That's not valid criticism. Telling me that I don't know anything about The Witcher when I put in over 100 hours in the various games and then went and downloaded fan translations of the books to read. And I haven't got through all of them, but I prefer the short story collections to the novels. I don't know. I'm just a short story person. I'm like, these are so cool. And I analyze every word and I love the descriptions and all that stuff. But it is just factually inaccurate that I don't know anything about The Witcher. And me saying that Ciri is younger in the books, Yennefer's deformity isn't played up, and Triss's hair is a different color, that isn't proof I know nothing about The Witcher. That isn't an argument or point having a sound basis in logic or fact, nor is it reasonable or cogent. The comment is earnest. I believe the person meant it when they said it, but it's not valid. It isn't valid criticism. It is earnest criticism. It is not valid criticism. And I'm going to criticize my camera in a minute. There we go. Focus. And I do sympathize with the belief. There's some validity to this, that too much earnest criticism is dismissed as trolling. And yes, valid criticism does get dismissed all the time. It is the nature of there just being so much criticism inherent in making video games or making content about video games or doing anything involved in a video game at all. But then we get into this idea of listening to valid criticism. And this is where I felt like I thought I had to do this video not for selfish reasons, but to defend the people who work very hard on video games and get accused. I've seen developers get accused of not listening to valid criticism. Sorry, guys, my mic's taking a lot of hits. I know one of the things I love about the video game industry is, despite, the big corporate masters at places like EA and Activision and even Ubisoft to an extent, Konami, Capcom, the corporate elements of those companies, even though they can seem sort of soulless a lot of the time, I know the developers care. And I know they do listen. They just can't implement changes based on every piece of valid criticism they receive, because it's not up to them sometimes. Sometimes it's, yeah, that's fair, but we had to choose how we were going to fail. Sometimes they will take criticisms to the higher ups, and they can't get the change approved. And then they get accused of not listening. And listening and implementing changes aren't the same thing. Listening to criticism means looking into it, not blindly agreeing with the criticism. One of the biggest skills you need to develop as a creative is not just knowing what criticism to listen to, but also how to change how to change your content so you're not just careening wildly like a ship three sheets to the wind. And the first thing I do when deciding whether I'm actually going to implement a change is look at the position someone was in then they made the statement. Screaming louder, angry typing doesn't make you more right. I am more likely to listen to someone who took the time to sort of sit down, calm themselves, and then writes one totally logical comment that lays out its case in a rational way is going to change my mind more than 1,000 people yelling at me. Because every YouTuber gets thousands of people yelling at them. Getting triggered doesn't make you more right. Caring a lot makes you very earnest, but it doesn't make your criticisms any more valid. And I really believe dialogue is about understanding, but also about persuasion. You have to make your case. And there's not enough effective dialogue in discussions about video games precisely because we are living in this false dichotomy of it's either valid criticism or it's trolling. Or it's harassment, and again, I said, I agree. So it's super clear because people love to read in shit that ain't there to what I say. I agree that too much earnest criticism, people being legitimately upset about something, is dismissed as trolling. Now, here's where I gotta go. Guys who are upset with me that 12%, 12 to 20%, those videos were still net positive, right? Like, there was just this influx of people, thanks to the YouTube algorithm, who were like, outraged. I get that you don't agree with me. I get that. And you're entitled to your opinion. The fact that you didn't get me to change my mind doesn't mean I'm not listening. The fact that I pulled up hair color charts to give you a valid rebuttal to your earnest criticism, to show you respectfully why you're wrong, instead of just dismissing you, is listening. Okay? The fact that I consulted with people in the first language of the work, the fact that I actually pulled up stuff to show, no, this ain't that. Okay, here's a chestnut, here's her hair, one of these things is not like the other. That's listening. And the fact that I do a video every week that is just responding to feedback, and people still insist I'm not listening, that's when it's just a cudgel. That's not valid criticism. You can say I might be wrong and not agreeing. In this case, no, I'm not. Facts are facts. But other times where it's more of a subjective thing, you may think I'm wrong, but not listening is one of the things you can't even earnestly accuse me of. Certainly not validly accuse me of. Because if you stop and think for a few minutes, the fact that I'm still talking about this says I'm listening. And why am I bothering to deal with the minority in this case? Well, for one, it's a good way to talk about, semantics and critical thinking, and let's use the right words for things, because we can't get dialogue going unless we're actually using the right words. And I offer that I think that we do need a third option, that this is a false dichotomy between valid criticism and trolling, because earnest but incorrect criticism is a gray area that deserves some time. Because I don't, and all creators don't have to see the criticism as valid to care that something clearly upset people about something, and this is clearly very important to them. Even though they are wrong on the facts, Something is clearly very emotionally connected for them in this. And that is something that should be cherished, because the fact that we care so much about this stuff is why we're, all sort of into the games. I mean, I remember when I played The Witcher 2, The Witcher 1 just wasn't a very good game, but it was a good try. It was a really interesting continuing story. The way they brought those characters back was very interesting, but it wasn't a great game. 2 was getting there. 3, I will defend as a great game. But one of the things that they did better in 3 than 2 was not yanking choice away from the player at critical moments. Geralt made some choices in 2 that it's like, and the tricky thing about making an RPG where you're playing as strongly defined a character as Geralt of Rivia in the books is that there are going to be certain things that he is just going to make a certain choice, and it is not up for debate. And so I personally question making an RPG where you're playing Geralt of Rivia instead of just making like an interesting action game with RPG elements, because he is such a clearly defined character. That was always something I struggled with the games being action RPGs. I thought 3 handled it better in that the choices you got were all choices that were closer to stuff that Geralt kind of would have made. That's just my opinion. It wasn't what was done, it was how it was done, if that makes any sense. And that doesn't mean you have to agree. Again, this is just my experiences with the game. And so I don't even consider that criticism, really. It's a comment. It's feedback. And that's the last thing I want to say on this point. And maybe I'll get into this tomorrow. Let me know, you quick people. Or maybe this will be the Feedback Friday topic. Yeah, Feedback Friday will give me more time. But why is the video game community as a whole so obsessed with criticism? Because if we're actually giving valid feedback, having sound basis in logic or fact, reasonable, emphasis on reasonable or cogent, and we're not just having an earnest emotional reaction that is resulting from or showing sincere and intense conviction, why aren't we equally focused on praise as opposed to criticism? Because games do some pretty amazing things. And I always feel like the criticism of a particular game or a franchise isn't matched by worthy praise for a franchise. I mean, no game franchise is for everyone, and every game franchise can get better and make improvements. But if you really want to seem like you're being reasonable, that you're not getting triggered by a couple things you didn't like and not being able to see the good, you should be able to find something praiseworthy to say about these game franchises, which is where my when I do, sort of the gender criticism, the feminist criticism of video games, where I divert from pretty much everybody else out there, because I take the good and the bad. I've sung the praises of Yennefer of Vengerberg as a character in The Witcher 3. I thought she was a fantastic character. I maintain that. I don't expect the Netflix series to come anywhere close, because I don't know how you can do better. She was a great, great, great character. Philippa Eilhart, great character. Takes a while to really develop that character, but great character. There are some really great female characters in the Witcher games. And that is important to talk about, as well as the hypersexualized elements of especially the early, the first two early games. That's reasonable. That's valid analysis. If you are weighting your criticism too much towards the critical, it is no longer valid. There hits a point where you are being so unduly negative, where you can't see the good in series like Grand Theft Auto and The Witcher and these things. You have such an advocate's haze, an activist haze of I must call out everything that's wrong with this, that you are showing sincere and intense conviction. You are being earnest sometimes, but you're no longer in the realm of valid criticism. And for someone to take for your criticism to be constructive, for it to actually make someone better, your criticism must be fair. Because otherwise somebody has to, work really hard to go, and they might get it right, they might get it wrong. That's where experience comes in. But somebody can go, well, this is kind of a shitty comment, but there's something there, and they take a little tiny bit of it. And then they try to be gracious and credit the person who was obnoxious about it for saying, oh no, they made us better. When in fact, I think that the game developers we are critiquing deserve better than what they're collectively getting right now. And that's why I decided to make this video, and why I may delve in more into the idea of why are we so critical? Because I have theories, but now is not the time. I try to keep these videos to half hours, so Patreon. Become a patron. It really helps me out, because YouTube demonetizes every Witcher video I do, and then I have to fight it. But people are interested in the content, so I keep doing it. My patrons let me do it. So patreon.com/LeannaK. Thanks for watching.